First of all, let me just start by, just as you mentioned, I've had the privilege of knowing him for many years now. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it goes back about 35 years or thereabouts. And this is not, like he said something about me, so I've got to say something about him. That's not the point. But the reason I think why the whole industry, in a sense, respects him is that he's taken this whole thing about a profession to another level in terms of, is there a purpose, is there a meaning to what we are doing in life? I must say that I think he found that calling much earlier in life, and he's actually made something out of it. And that's a very rare development that one, in my mind, I don't think many people get so often and so well. So I really admire him a lot, I respect him a lot, and I think there's a lot that all of us have to learn from the manner in which he's conducted himself, his life, and thereby has inspired others. So I would say that you are extremely fortunate that you have this privilege of being here with him, and I'm very privileged to know him. And let me just therefore start from there as the first point. And so let's say I head an organization, and therefore I'm supposed to be quote-unquote great, accomplished, a leader. And the first point I would therefore like to make is that I don't think it's the position or the title or the platform that kind of defines the person. And that's a mistake that we often make. I think what we make out of the position or the platform or the title is what defines the person. And to that extent, I would still say that I'm still discovering myself. I'm still actually trying to create an impact in society, in wherever I'm working, to see that it has a positive influence on the people around me, on the people that deal with me, and so on. So the first thing, therefore, I would like to really emphasize on, that it's not the position that one needs to go with, but it's what you make out of that position, etc. That's really very important. And if you do look at people with that lens, I think you will many a times, if you were to just simply lay down, say, okay, what did so-and-so do when he was in a position, whatever he or she was, you find it difficult to come out with anything concrete. And when you do find it difficult to come out with anything concrete, it pretty much shows that, you can't really call that person a leader, or you can't really call that as accomplishment. So I think that's the first thing, the first point that I'd like to make. The way I thought, I was just chatting with Anil before, I'm just going to share with you some experiences, some of my learnings across my journey, and then of course I'd love to have more of an interactive session and answer your questions and ask you some questions. And I hope that would be more convenient, because otherwise I have to go to sleep and you'll be personally for the rest of your life. I'd like to start with that I'm not one of those who had a phenomenal educational career. And I would like to look at myself and make the point that if I could kind of make something out of myself, I would say anyone and everyone can. Both my parents were teachers. They were both highly educated. They were both professors of law. My father studied at Harvard. My mother studied at Yale. And you can imagine that they were both in the mid-80s. My father was alive in 1985. My mother was alive in 1984. So for them to have, do I need to do something with this? So, is there another shaking? Yes. Okay. Hope that works. So if you can go back to 50 years, 60 years, and to go to a place like Harvard and Yale, it must have been something really tremendous. So I grew up with an academic background where just talk of education, learning, etc. Always around. taught me a couple of things. It just taught me that as a teacher, what you value most is not the money that you get, it's not the salary that you get, because that's a pittance. And in any case, I don't think anyone gets into teaching for the love of money and so on. But the respect that you get from your students and the gratitude that they have for you is something which is absolutely immeasurable. And what I saw when I was growing up, that when students would kind of carry on that respect, not just while they were in the university for those few years, but it would carry on way beyond after they left, they got on, did brilliantly in their careers, proved the point that this respect was something that had been earned by my parents and not something they commanded because of the position or the title, etc. that they had to take. That had indeed a deep impact on me. I still remember a time when they had a Japanese student who came after he finished his course, and he was kind of just going back, and he had this wonderful bicycle, with gears and all of that. And he said, "Look, I'm going back. I have no need for it. You have a young son. I'd like to gift it to him." And my father said, "I'm sorry, but I can't accept it, because that's not the right thing to do." I was watching there, and I said, "God, I need that cycle. I'd love to have that cycle. Why is my father being so difficult? This is not a quid pro quo. He's got the results. He's going out. He's going to throw it otherwise. Why can't I get it?" But my father was pretty firm to say, "No, it's just not the right thing to do." I learned something that day. That Japanese student was in touch with my parents till my father passed away, till about 3 years ago. And I'm sure that one incident had an impact on the way he kind of interacted with us as a family for many years. I guess the point the learning that I had in my growing up career was, in the early stages of my life, was that respect and trust and the value of integrity that you get from people that you interact with is absolutely immeasurable. The other thing that struck with me about my father, he had a pretty bad temper, very bad. He was short-tempered, he would get into arguments which would get rather noisy, even in official meetings, as I hear. But no one would ever kind of point a finger at him, because on the integrity side, on the value side, it was all so rock solid that he could pretty much get away with quote-unquote nonsense in terms of just the way one would come across. I'm for a moment not suggesting that one needs to be rude or one needs to be raise one's voice while talking, etc. But the point I'm making is that the power and the force of integrity and values and what is right is so strong that it pretty much overcomes any other hurdle or any other shortcoming that one might have. And I kind of got that. Moving on. One day I went to a Jesuit school, and I think when I was about 8 or 9, I was so taken up by the priests in the Jesuit school that I came home one day and I told my mother, I want to become a priest. And as you would imagine, I was the only child. My mother was like horrified at first. But then she said that that's what you'd like to do, go ahead and do it. And I think I was all 8 or 9. Go ahead and do it. But before you make a choice, try and understand what that means. Just learn something a little more. And I said, no, I'm pretty clear. I've been to the chapel, I've been to the church, I've read the prayers. I love the dress that they wear, with those flowing robes and the white sash. This is me. This is who I am, young mother. That's it. She didn't push back. She didn't say, question doesn't arise. I'm locking you up at home. You're not going to school from tomorrow. Over time, I kind of got out of it. But the other thing that I learned at that point in time, and later maybe, was that if you fight something which is, let's say, you've got to choose your moment to make a point. And if you try and push something which is not willing to be pushed, you're fighting a losing At that point in time, I was not willing to be pushed. And I think if my mother or my father would have pushed me at that point in time, I guess the timing was not right. They were wise enough to understand that maybe he discovered things himself. And my guess is if I would have still made the choice after 4 or 5 years to go down that path, it would have been fairly okay with them. I don't think they were that narrow-minded for me not to follow that path. But I did, again, learn something. Moving on, when I came to class 12, I must say, I pretty much blew it. I was a pretty good student at school, but I blew it in terms of college. Didn't secure enough marks to get into a decent college and so on. And I was pretty distraught at the end. I wanted to do engineering. Couldn't make it to, at that point in time, the IITs, the regional engineering colleges, etc. And it was the whole world has come to us. I did manage to get admission into Manipal, which was a college that started somewhere in the 60s. I entered it when I was in 80s, so it was about 20, 22 years old at that time. So they were taking experience and they took them in. I did pretty well because I had gotten knocked in life before. And it was pretty clear to me that if I didn't do well there, then I had nobody else to blame but myself. But what it also taught me was that it's never the end of the world. There are always doors and chances that open up. And I don't think therefore one would need to beat oneself so much that there's no future for me, there's nothing to be done, and so on and so forth. And that experience did teach me quite a lot. Moving on, I think when I started working with a Finnish company called Agrawala, with whom I was for a good 23 years. And over the course of 23 years, I started off as a sales engineer, where the first job was actually, in those days, you had what was called a cardex system. I don't know, maybe you might recall a cardex system, but what it was simply that when somebody went and made a customer visit, you had to record it somewhere, so that you had a record of when you meet a customer, and so on and so forth. We didn't have too many IT-related infrastructure and systems at that point in time. So my job was to write down in the cardex, when did somebody meet what customer and so on and so forth. That taught me a lot. I went on and I did that as well. And the point I'm making is that the learning that I had by being on the ground, doing some of the most mundane things, was perhaps the best learning of my life so far. I know whatever I know about power plants, simply because I built those 2 or 3 power plants myself in those early days. I know something about what it means to a dialogue with a customer and what is it that needs to be captured and what is it that does not, because I did that stuff right in days. And I think if I just kind of correlate it with today, where many a times there is a desire to kind of simply get to the top without going through this phase of dirtying your hands in a manner of speaking, being on the ground, getting some hard practical experience. I see this pretty often now that I look at many youngsters who even come up to me and G, and who, fresh out of college, we want to head this multi-million or this multi-billion-dollar business, and we are ready for it. Not understanding that they haven't been through the grind of what does it actually mean to be on the ground, on the floor, and so on and so forth. But I learned a lot that way, made my way up. Why at Agrawala? Agrawala is a Finnish company. And this company, Finland is a small country. It's a Nordic country, way up north. It's got a population of just about 5.5 million. I ended up living there for about 5 or 6 years, for about 6 years. It's an amazing country. With 6 million people, they've got at least a dozen global brands that have a market share of over 30 to 40%. But the one unique thing about the people over there is it's a very egalitarian society, meaning it's everyone's common. They shun any form of ostentatious behavior. Anyone trying to show off by the size of the car or by the kind of clothes one wears, etc., is looked down upon by society. And the quality of life over there is something that is a priority for those people, as opposed to the let's say, what your title or position, etc. Me and there was another friend of mine, Finnish guy called Kari. We joined on exactly the same day in Barcelona. I had this thing about, I joined as a sales engineer, I wanted to become quickly a manager, go up the chain, etc., etc. We started doing exactly the same job. 4 years or 5 years after I was in Finland, I did become an area manager, I did go on to become a manager, and so on. Kari was a sales engineer. Even after I left Finland and came back to India after about 6 years, he was still a sales engineer. I came back in a fairly reasonable position back in India, but he was a sales engineer. And he was a good friend, and I used to talk to him. He said, look here, Banmali, your trip in life is you want to do all these fancy things. My trip in life is I want to do my job, but I want to go back home at 4 o'clock, 3:30 or whatever, to be with my family, spend time with my family, with my children, tend to my garden. That is my priority in life. And afterwards, I very often thought, who kind of is better off between the two of us? Believe me, I didn't get a clear answer. In fact, the answer was, maybe he was much better off, in the sense that he was doing exactly what he wanted to do, he was enjoying what he wanted to do, whereas I was still caught up in this quote-unquote race or get to somewhere, get to the next thing, get to the next thing, and so on and so forth. And it just never seemed to be enough. Whereas he seemed to have found his calling, he was pretty cool, calm, composed about it, and he had a great time. Till today, we are great friends. Till today, he's a sales engineer. But I would argue that what he has in his life, in many ways, is better than what I would have in terms of just quality and being content with what one has. And I think that taught me one thing, which is that if you were to make a balance sheet of one's life, and forget life, even where we are, or just who we are as individuals, and compare it to anybody else, the sum total for everyone is pretty much the same. I don't think there is any difference. Any two people you can take. And I can bet that if you total up the sum total of, let's say, what's good and what's not so good, for any two people, at the end of the day, it's all pretty much the same. And I think if we get that properly, my feel is that we look at life a little differently. We kind of avoid chasing stuff which is elusive and where it is never enough. Because there's a time when we need to say that enough is enough. I just want to switch gears a little bit. And just to kind of make the point that I articulated earlier, which is that I think it's never the end of the world. If you've got a certain drive, if you've got a certain humility, if you've got a certain sincerity of purpose, I think it is possible for anyone and everyone to get there. But if I can, I'm sure anyone can. As I said, I don't have those fancy educational stuff behind me to got me here. Because I do believe that experience is a great teacher. Having come thus far, and now kind of connecting it a little bit from a business perspective, if you just see And I would be a little provocative here and make a few points. The first being that I don't think there is any more anything called a free market. If you look around, and while it may be present to some degree in New Horizons and so on and so forth, and we go through the debate to that, I'll just come back to that. But if you look at the large section of industry, infrastructure, manufacturing, the amount of regulation that there is, the amount of limitation that there are, and the amount of societal pressure that there is to make sure that while you are in business, while you are conducting business, it is done in a fashion that is acceptable to the people at large around you. And I think the one very important thing that's coming up is, and I'm sure that all of you are aware, that it's the emerging markets where the bulk of the opportunity is. If you see if you go to any emerging market, there is a huge gap between demand and supply, and you can't have free market principles operate in a system where demand far exceeds supply. It just doesn't work. A free market doesn't work. If we as businesses and we as body leaders understand the point that when we go into a situation like this, there is a larger responsibility that we have towards society. If we don't get that point, I think we will awaken to that point in a rather rude manner. So the first thing, I mean, in terms of business of present times, I would say that the concept of free market, in that sense, is a thing of the past. The need to be able to justify to society, to be transparent about what one is doing in business, and be able to convince people that it's a fair distribution of wealth, in a manner of speaking, is extremely important and extremely valuable. The second thing that you see around the world today, and if you look at technology, the company that I work for now, which is GE, is all about technology. And if I go back about 10 years into the history of GE, technology development was all about you make the best aircraft engines, you make the best power generation equipment, make the best healthcare equipment, the best locomotives. It was almost like you push the boundaries of technology, irrespective of the cost that it takes to build that technology. And now I think you do have a paradigm which would say that unless and until technology is not affordable, it's not going to serve a purpose. That's a completely different way of looking at how we develop technology. So you don't really have a free market because of societal pressure. If we talk about developing technology, it's got to be something which is going to be affordable, otherwise I think there's again going to be resistance from society. And the third point I'd like to make in the context of let's say global management and so on, would be that if you look at management and leading people, I think the old command and control structure of leading people is obsolete. The era of being inclusive or having to take people along when you make a decision is the only way by which you can run organizations, a team, a set of people, and so on. Because there are always more than one perspectives to anything. And there's never, especially in current times, an absolute kind of authority that anyone would have. Even the CEO of a company would not have absolute authority to do whatever he or she would like to do. There will always be a board to consult, there will always be an active shareholder to consult, there will always be somebody in government to consult. So to be comfortable with the fact that we need to take people along and be consultative in the manner in which we make decisions is something which is extremely crucial, and without that, I think it becomes very difficult to manage in present times. In GE, we measure the performance of people along two axes. One is performance, your performance, how are you doing in terms of numbers, this, that, and the other. But the second is values. And the values as defined in the GE context are four values. One around expertise, you've got to be good at something. Second around imagination and courage, which third around external focus, which is about customers and so on. But the fourth one is around inclusiveness, or are you able to take people along? And it's an extremely important thing. If we find people not being collaborative in the manner in which they look at things, then I think their ability to move further within the system is limited. I thought I'll just cover some of these things over here first. And we can always get into a dialogue as well. I just want to, it's never the end of the world, there's always an opportunity out there. But the world has changed, and we've got to be open to scrutiny, examination, evaluation by the society and people outside. We've got to be collaborative in the manner in which we do things, because without that, present-day management just doesn't function. And above all, I'd say that if we don't have a higher purpose or a higher reason for being in business or in anything that we're doing, it's going to be difficult to achieve any of the earlier things that I mentioned. So there's got to be a reason, a purpose as to why one is in business. And I think everyone needs to find that purpose for his or her organization. Let me stop there for a moment, and I'd love to kind of address anything that you might have on this or anything else that comes to your mind. Maybe we can then take it in any direction that you have. So, I'm sorry if it was too boring. We're just sharing some thoughts, just a little rapid, I do get that. What is it that comes to your mind? I mean, you're doing the course of the year, you're going to step out into the world. How many of you have work experience already? All of us. What do you think? How important is the whole discussion around purpose in terms of where you're working, how you're working, or how you look at life? Any thoughts, any comments? Anyone? Does that cross your mind, or is it too early? Does it matter? Does it make a difference? Or?
Sir, I have a question.
Yes.
Somewhere in between you mentioned that if you calculate the cooling back to June, some of the working state.
Yes.
Am I right, sir?
Yes.
Sir, when we are considering this, is it the people?
So, I'd say for anyone, and I'm being a little philosophical here.
Because in that case, if you compare a saint and a criminal, I'm not able to relate how the sum total amount comes out to be same.
Yeah, that's a good question. And please get me, I'm not as learned as Anil, right? So I'm sure you have a far deeper insight into this. But the simple point I'm trying to make is that any two people, anywhere, I just want to make a point that there's no reason for us to aspire to be like somebody else. To try and have something that somebody else has because I don't have it. That's the point. Because I may want something else that he or she has, and believe me, he or she may want something that I have, and he or she doesn't. And if you kind of, in that manner, try and stack up what is it that I have that he doesn't have, and he has that I don't have, at the end of it, maybe it will equal itself out.
So it's about learning from each other.
Well, more than learning, I would say that usually we say, I wish I was like him. I wish I had that something. I wish I had that house. I wish I had that car. I wish I was as intelligent as he is. I wish I had as much hair as he does. Or I wish, you know what I mean? I don't think there is a reason for us to aspire in that sense. Because all of us have something which somebody else out there does not. That's not, to my mind, that's not the right way to motivate ourselves to get something. That, let me be like him or her, and that is what is driving us towards doing things. Because that's a never-ending, A, that's just not true, and B, that's a never-ending kind of future. So that's the point I'm making. I must say I don't have an intelligent answer to comparing the states with the criminal. I'm sure we could explain that as well in some way. a classmate of mine, with whom I was in school, exactly the same age, went on to do extremely well in academics, went on to do extremely well professionally, became chairman of companies at a very, very young age, and of large corporations. And you know, I said, God, I want to be like that. This is my dream. Well, I met him one day, and you know, he says, I introduced myself. He says, yes, of course I remember you. Who can forget a name like Banmali? So of course I remember you. We were together in class 3, here and there, or whatever. And we got talking, and I realized that I was married, I had 2 children, etc. He was still single. He was, you know, and I said, so and so, how's life? And he says, it's good, work keeps me occupied. But you know, I'm still by myself. And I was wondering, what would I like? Would I like to be like him without a family? No. I love my family. So I want to be like him with my family. And that's, you know, that's a bit of too much of a dream. So I think we all go through these phases, but the sooner we realize that there's no reason for any of us to, you know, just try and aspire for something else than somebody else has. Then more often than not, I think it's more materialistic than anything else. Yeah.
I want to add a line to whatever he said is the truth to live your own truth, something like that. What you're saying, I mean, to live your own truth,
Yeah.
what you are.
Yeah, and you're right. And I think, you know, it's also a question of what the earlier we're able to find the purpose that we have as to why are we living in a manner of speaking. And I don't want to make it too philosophical, but in organizations and companies, very often, I think if you ask a company as to why are you in business, and if you get the answer that I'm in business to make money, you can pretty much bet that it's going to have a rocky journey. Because that's not a reason enough to drive passion, to drive direction, to get alignment, etc. I'm not saying from a business perspective, making profits or making money is not important. But if that's the only pole star or north star that you have, then I think it's going to be a problem. And I'd say that even in GE, which is a 100-year-old company, we changed direction midway. About 15 years ago, GE was all about, I don't know how many of you know or read about GE. It's one of those absolutely cold-blooded, performance-driven, numbers-driven company, right? Only thing that matters is stock price, nothing else. Even in that setup, about 15 years ago, I think today if you ask, what is G all about? And the answer that you get is it's about moving, it's about curing, it's about powering, and it's about building. And I think somewhere there was a realization that, look here, we can't drive a $150 billion company with the paradigm that you need to make money, that you need to just really get your stock price up. You can't run a corporation. And the moment you switch the paradigm to having certain objectives, and this is what we're doing. We run a healthcare business. I think our people who work in the healthcare business, whenever I try and have a review in that business, it's never, the financials come last. They are all so excited about, I made an X-ray machine which costs less than half of what otherwise an X-ray machine costs. Or I made an ultrasound machine which is, it is able to save so many lives. What a rush. And I know that if I get that piece right, if they keep working, coming out with those machines, coming out by making a difference in people's lives, the financials will follow. And I actually changed the review mechanism. I said, I don't even want to look at the financials. We'll come to that later. I know they're important, but we'll come to that later. And it's made a difference to the way people look at it. So I think finding one's own purpose, because that's what you carry to an organization as well, and
doing my human resource leadership program. We have a subject called organization development going on.
Yeah.
And in that we have come across a moment where we were discussing when to have a OD intervention in an organization. So when we were discussing in terms of a crisis situation, we came to a lot of different perspectives as to how to deal with the team when the company is doing really bad and it's in a, say for instance, in a crisis situation like an economic slowdown or something. So from an OD perspective, we discussed a lot in that. I would like to know from you that from a leader's perspective, how would a leader motivate his team in terms of a situation which is really put the company in a turmoil position, and how will it impact employees and how he can motivate their employees?
I think that's a great question. And it's always very difficult to look at motivation or leadership when you're going through a crisis. Let me share with you two examples in the GE context. One was in 2008 when we had a financial crisis. At that point in time, the financial part of GE was so big and it went down that GE actually had to go out and borrow money just to stay afloat. It was Warren Buffett who gave money and kept GE afloat. At that point in time, you can just about imagine the whole right? There was this huge, gigantic company which is maybe about to go under because of the financial crisis. The first thing that I think was done was let people know what the scope and size of the challenge is, as opposed to hiding it. So I think if people know what the challenge is, I think they respond and react and behave in a much better way, as opposed to hiding it and being secretive about it. I'm just sharing with you what we at GE did, and I'm sure there'll be different approaches, but this is the one that I like really well. The second was you've got to make certain tough decisions. That's not the time to be staying soft. The tough decision in GE's case was to actually give stock of the company to Warren Buffett at a fairly discounted price. It was a tough decision. It's not easy. It's like mortgaging a house. It's like selling a flat. But it was done because that was the only way to keep the company afloat. You need to have the courage to make those tough decisions. And I think it was done. The third decision that was made was, I think the company said, never again are we going to put the company in this situation. And it was therefore decided that we will do a couple of things. First, we will not have the company be vulnerable from a financial standpoint, from a financial services standpoint. Therefore, reduce the size of the financial service business. Grow the other part of the business so that something like this never ever happens again. And build a war chest of cash so that even if something like this close to that were to happen, you have enough cash that you don't have to go out and do something. GE Capital, which was a large part of GE, almost 2/3 plus of the profitability of GE, decided that we would bring down GE Capital from there to 30%, a major transformation. We are now 30%, only 30% of the top line and bottom line of GE today comes from GE Capital. You go back about 5 or 6, 7 years, it used to be more than 60%. Today, GE has a war chest with reserves in excess of about 80 billion that came up over time. But the point I'm making is that these are decisions that we need to make very clear. I'll share with you another example. Sorry, one. Fukushima. When Fukushima happened, Fukushima had GE machines. It is about now. It is your machines that have stopped functioning because of a tsunami. And there are people that have been affected. And even though we survived this more than 25 or 30 years ago, how do you manage a crisis like this? And I think in that situation, the chairman of the company felt it was a great time to groom the leader. And what he did was, normally you would say the chairman would kind of get together and say, okay, I take charge of this crisis. He said, person X, who heads the global part of our business, he said, this is what is happening. You go figure out what's to be done. You go brief the board in terms of what needs to be done. He saw that as an opportunity to groom, train someone in Banmali Agrawala. So I guess there are different ways of dealing with the crisis. There's as you will do examples in the GE context, but I think you can use the crisis in a very constructive way. But I don't think there are standard answers to what needs to be done in the event of a crisis. I think each situation will have to be dealt with. Sorry.
Sir, when you say that financials are kept later on and innovation is the more important part, how it goes when it comes to crisis, and how is performance in that competition factor?
It does. And I think when you have a crisis, clearly your priorities will change, because there's no point talking about financial performance if you're not going to have a company at all. So you've got to reprioritize and figure out what is it that's most critical, address that. My suggestion would be to be open and transparent, in terms of what the challenge is that everyone gets there. And yes, then other things get to be secondary. I mean, there is no long term without the short term. Right? So in a crisis, the short term is the most important. So you've got to first solve the short term before you get into the long term. Anything else? Yeah.
Apologize if I am being out of track. I just want to understand, being from GE, we have been taught in all the courses with the GE case study. So what does it take to get into GE for the students like us?
Well, so there are various. First, let me just take a step back. And I think GE is an organization. It's one of the only one. I'm not selling GE here. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just trying to make the point that it's only one of the only Dow Jones company that was in the stock exchange 130 years ago, which is still out there. And there must be a reason for it. And the point I'm making is the only one reason as to why GE is what it is because it got its people-related processes and systems to be absolutely top-class. It sets the benchmark globally in terms of how do you manage people, motivate them, challenge them, recognize meritocracy, and so on and so forth. So the one thing that GE has is this. And therefore, I think everyone, no matter where you come from, you know that if you've got capability, that's the place to be in. In terms of taking people in, we've got various programs. We take people in at fresh from college. We find that that's the most conducive place for people to take in, because normally, to put things in perspective, the chairman of GE, whenever he is appointed, is above 45 years of age. Now, if you've got to become chairman by the time you're 45, you've got to be in the system, say for about 15, 18 odd years, to understand really how does this mammoth machine work. So which means we prefer to take people in straight from fresh from college, groom them in the GE way of thinking, and then give them tremendous opportunities and scale. So we've got various programs. Some are general, some are technical. And then there are leadership programs for various things. In GE, we have our own training school. It's called Total. We do a lot of training out there. We somehow believe we do training better than outside. I think it's very effective because it's produced many leaders around the world. But the effort and the amount and the resources that are spent in training are outstanding. So if one is something, you can go to the website and you can even apply over there. But that's the way we take it. Yep. Yeah.
So you spoke about finding your purpose.
Yes.
And you said you also gave an example of one of your friends did well in life, and when you had a comparison with them. So my question to you is, so when we look for this purpose, are we also considering the trade-offs in process? And how do we judge what kind of a trade-off is really very effective to actually reach the purpose of education?
Yeah. And again, I'm not sure whether there is a magic or a standard formula for everyone, right? I think for each one of us, we need to find that, first of all, If I like music, I would pursue that at the cost of, making something else. The one thing which I would say, however, that we keep forgetting in leadership, or for that matter in excellence, is that if you do get into leadership, more often than not, there certainly is a price that you pay something else. And more often than not, it's the price of the family that you pay in terms of the time and attention that you pay. And it is indeed a trade-off that has to be made. Even in the case of the example that I gave, I chose leadership over the time that I wanted to spend with my family. Kari chose his family over the let's say, leadership. And again, those are very personal choices. Right? And each one, there is no right or wrong answer. Am I right or is he right? There is no right. Each one gives a answer. But as long as we are clear that yes, we are making that choice and that it has, every choice has a consequence. I still remember my wife, she was a housewife. She preferred to stay at home and bring up our children, raise our children and give them the whole time to them. And I still remember one day I came home, we promoted this, that, and the other. And she postgraduate in Russian literature, she was more educated than I am. In her own way, she said, so have you ever thought when I will be promoted? And I got to thinking that it was a very profound statement. It didn't hit me that time, but it got me thinking. But here, I'm kind of being driven by my promotion, what was driving her there? It's just to see children grow up. That's her job. When does she get a promotion? When does she get an increment? She doesn't. It's a confused kind of job. So it's a very personal. Is she sad about the fact that she's not working despite being qualified? She's not. She's made that choice consciously. And I think it's as long as one is aware of the followers, I think it's okay. If I were to roll back my life 30 years, and then would I make the same trade-offs today? I really don't know. Maybe I was too young at that time and just carried away by, you need to become a manager, but I think one just needs to be aware. And the earlier one sometimes gets that awareness better, but listen, you don't learn everything in a day. Life teaches a lot. So I'm sure we all find these moments for us.
So,
yeah.
I've been following a few thought leaders on leadership, right from, say, Royal Teaching. We've been associated with G for quite some time and wrote a book called Leadership Engine. Quite a few on Gladwell, Maxwell, quite a few people. But I'm not getting a clear picture in terms of what leadership means. So what is your definition of leadership? And
so I wish somebody would have a clear-cut definition of leadership. I remember when, before this, I used to be with Tatas, and Tatas, there's one of the directors in Tata Sons, a person called R. Gopalakrishnan. I'm not sure how many knows him well, but he's a thought leader. He writes very well. You must have read some of his columns. And I think at one point in time, he actually got one of his assistants who was a Tata administrative officer to just sum up how many seminars on leadership and HR were conducted in a year in the city of Mumbai. And he found that number to be some horrendous number. And the point I'm making is that it's a subject which is debated, argued, etc., etc. Everyone claims to be the expert, or I know it all about leadership. But again, I think it's a very personal thing as to how you define it. And I've just got 2 or 3 perspectives based on my experience. First, my view is that leadership is just about being oneself. And it's a little bit about what we were discussing earlier. Just stop trying to be like somebody else, but just be what I am. It is that difficult, it is that simple, and it is that difficult. Because there's too much of pressure, peer pressure, and all of that. But first, I would say that. Second, I think it's to my mind, it's about others, and it's not about oneself. And I leading from the back as opposed to leading from the front. It's about how do you make others look good? How do you make others perform well? And it's all about getting others to improve or behave or conduct themselves much better in your presence, and for that behavior to continue even after you've gone. So we leave a legacy behind which is so inspiring that gets people to conduct and behave in a certain fashion. I've kind of found those things to be very powerful. Other than that, I'd only say that I think it is a term which is also misused, or I think there's too much of weight put on the very term leadership. Because just imagine, if everybody wants to be a leader, then who wants to be a follower? Have you ever heard anyone who says, I want to be a follower? Has anyone ever said that? Everybody wants to be a leader. And I think one of the important characteristics is that if you want to be a leader, I think you've got to learn how to be a follower as well. And I think leadership does not necessarily therefore mean that you've got 10,000 people, that you're commanding, or you've got. It's, to my mind, in whatever job one is doing, are you making the right decisions? Are you thinking about correctly? Even if you've got nobody that is reporting to you, that also is leadership. And I think if you get that piece right, then it's not a clamor to be the CEO or have a certain position and define leadership in terms of the length and breadth of the premises one would have or the size of the office. You know what I mean? That's not really the sense. So I'm sorry if I've confused you, but there are no easy answers. There are no easy answers. It is a tough thing. Yeah. Anil, did I kind of clear the pitch in terms of leadership? In the sense that did I say something which
No.
disturb
In fact, I often tell them that followers. And the way I say that is that if you have a cause that you stand for, then the reason people are with you is because of that cause.
Absolutely.
And so that's the whole essence of leadership that we are teaching here. And actually what we said is just reinforcing that point in your own way. So I think this is very aligned with what we discussed.
Perfect. See, I mean, that's the advantage of having done some experience and
I also say to people that leadership is about making choices. Some students have made a choice to be present in this session to talk to you. Some people are making a choice to be physically present but are not mentally present here. That's also a choice. Because sometimes trivial issues come in the way of their own potential realization. So sometimes people just sit in the room. That's also a choice. I mean, they are not understanding the wealth of this dialogue that is going on, some of us. So it's all a matter of choice. I mean, you become a great leader because of the choices you make, including the way we are present right now. That is a choice. Some of us are not even understanding the significance of this dialogue. And some of us are getting it in its essence. And I think that's a great choice because, if I was, I just think they are so fortunate to get somebody like you to learn from. And I only hope that we take responsibility for that choice right now.
Well, there's a great point. One more point I'd like to make, what you were discussing. I mean, many times we just are not comfortable with who we are as individuals. I think it's very important to be just comfortable. Because if we are comfortable, we'll be confident, we'll be proud of who we are and what our capabilities are, and that will reflect in whatever we do. I must say, I got out of that personally after a very long time, because I didn't get this for a very, very long time in my life. So, you guys are bright, you are brilliant, you've got a lot more resources, you've got great teachers here, you've got great people to kind of follow. So make the most of it. Make the most of it. We aren't very many people who are as fortunate as you are, who are as blessed as you are. Make the most of it. Yeah.
At one point in time you said today youngsters are not getting the concept that they need to get their hands dirty to climb the ladder. On the other end, you also listen to people saying that everybody needs to start coming up with their own innovations, and entrepreneurship is the need of the hour. Now, when we're talking about entrepreneurship, a lot of youngsters like me might not have the experience, but we have the intention to go on an entrepreneurial venture or an entrepreneurial way of path or career. Now, how do we take this to? To one end, you have to gain experience. Another end, you want to start something of your own. So when is the time you decide that you gain enough experience and then can start your entrepreneurship or entrepreneurial venture?
Yeah, and I think that, again, that's a very good question. And by the way, I do agree that I think we keep talking about solving the job crisis in the country and so on and so forth. And I don't think we're going to be able to solve that problem by simply creating jobs in the organized or the unorganized sector, but it's going to be more through entrepreneurs and people who kind of develop their own businesses and so on. But having said that, if you look at the very essence of entrepreneurship, there's a large element of taking risk. When you talk about taking risk, it's essentially about judgment. Because risk is you cannot define or quantify risk many times. You've got to have a view. You've got to therefore get into a mode of judgment. That what might happen? What will I do if the results of the elections are whatever they are? And am I therefore willing to take a perspective, have a judgment about it, and am I therefore willing to take certain positions? To be able to judge or to be able to have a perspective or get into this mode of judgment, I think you need some amount of information, data, experience, and from sometimes even counsel. And as long as we understand that it's going to be difficult to make judgments purely on the basis, and of course there is a gut feel as well, but the element of experience, the more experience you have, the better final obviously would be the judgment, because you might have been through such a situation before, etc., etc. But it doesn't mean that when you almost live your life, and that's when you begin to get to be entrepreneurial. So you've got to find the balance. And again, there is no that, okay, 2 years of work and that's when you begin to get judgment. Not necessary. I think it depends on the situation, it depends on what the matter is on hand. But do realize that it is a combination of experience, of what you believe in terms of what your gut feel is and what you really believe in, of data. I think it's more often than not we make a mistake of not looking at hard data when we make decisions. And I think one should never be shy of asking and seeking help and counsel from people who've been around. Right? You put all that together, I think the faster you put this together, the sooner you get into that mode of being entrepreneurial. And by the way, you can even be entrepreneurial inside what you're doing inside a structured large organization. Right? In fact, large organizations in G are trying to create an atmosphere where all employees get to be entrepreneurial. So you get a combination of having a certain sense of security, but the ability to still take risk. But this is something that again, I think will come. I'm sorry you asked such difficult questions. I wish I could say the answer to this is 4 and the answer to this is 2, but it just goes to show that you guys are deep thinkers and philosophers. I'm just a practicing manager, so I just kind of manage things day to day.
I would like to say something. That would be my way of answering this question, and for you to tell me my way of thinking as well. When you say that you have to go up the ladder, learn things, build experiences, the essence is about gaining experience. And when you are an entrepreneur, I don't think when you start a company, you have 100 people below you and you just sit back and give instructions. Never about that. When you're an entrepreneur, I think you take that road, you gain experiences, you do those, go up the ladder the same way you are in an organization. So I think the essence is gaining that experience.
Yeah, you're right, and I totally agree with you. The only difference being that if experience is the only way of learning, it's a very slow process. Right? And that's where I think other things like experience of others, right? You don't have to experience it yourself. One doesn't have to bang one's head against the wall to know that pain. Somebody else can tell you that, you therefore be careful. Data and information. And I think above all, is it something that you really feel very strongly and passionate about? Because if you do, then you will overcome hurdles and challenges as they come your way. But if you don't, then the simple challenge will take a right turn, and so on and so forth. So experience, yes, but also coupled with all these other dimensions. And I think in today's time and age, all these are available in ample measure. Data, counsel, others' experiences, learning, crowdsourcing, what have you. Yeah.
Good evening, sir. This is leadership program. So I want to know, at the beginning you mentioned that you have inclination towards spirituality. Is it?
Well, I do. I mean, when you say, and I think Anand mentioned that, I certainly, in the sense that,
So you
yes, I'll answer yes. Sorry.
Consciously practice spirituality.
I'm not sure whether I've reached that stage of consciously practicing, but at least certainly think about it. And yes.
So I want to know, has that transformed you as a person, as a business leader, and what were those significant changes that came into your professional and personal life?
Great question.
Maybe practice of spirituality or maybe inclination.
Fantastic. Great question. And the short answer to the question is yes. One question I can answer. Yes. let me give you proof. If I go back into my early years, I was extremely impatient. I did not have the patience to hear a person out, to constantly interrupt people. I was pretty abrasive myself. Till I learned that this was partly living in Finland, where society is a lot more, sedate and calm and cool, and till I got into this mode of thinking, and I realized that, this is not right. And I consciously got into a phase of, I had to do it the hard way, just shutting myself up to the person who treated whatever he or she was saying, and then start speaking. And then slowly it got into my system. So yes, it played a very important. The second, just to be comfortable with who I am. I think I'm increasingly becoming more and more comfortable with who I am. I don't think I'm there as yet. It's a journey, but I'm certainly more comfortable than what it was maybe 10 years ago. And it's all, to my mind, the consequence of what you call, let's say, spirituality. But for me, it's just listening to people, listening to people who kind of study this as a way of living, and it's way of being impacted. And so I don't chase. I don't try to chase stuff without a reason. There's got to be a deeper cause. I've been able to make certain choices in life, including changing jobs, because I realized that something else had a higher priority than the job. So I moved from Bombay to Delhi with the Tatas, director on the board of Tata Power. I had to move to Delhi because taking care of aged parents to me was a driving need as opposed to doing something else that I was. And I was able to make that choice. It didn't take me 10 hours to make that choice. It came pretty easily. And when I look back, if I had to make that choice 10 years ago, it would have been, it would have mentioned. So it has certainly helped. And when I talk to my friends, they say, yeah, there is a clear difference in who I am. And I'd like to believe it's not only age that is doing it, but it is something of I would very strongly, urge that there's a lot of value. Initially it sounds, some stuff, some, yeah. Then having to go through and earn experience in one's life. You know what I mean? I mean, a terrible tragedy, a terrible incident, a terrible something which can kind of shake you. You don't have to go through that. I mean, there are people there, there are the number of so much of valuable knowledge out there that can tell us all this. So why do we have to go through terrible experiences to learn that? That's the answer. I don't know that. So I'm glad I asked one question. Yeah. But listen, I think it's been absolutely fascinating. I love to just be with, you know, young people. We have a technology center in Bangalore. We've got about 5,500 people over there. It's full of youngsters. We filed something like 300 patents from that place. And the first time I remember when I went there, and it was a function in the evening, you know, we had all these boys and girls. Somebody hadn't shaved for 15 days, some, you know, sloppy, etc., etc. And my first one was, God, what is this? Till I started to talk. And one guy comes and says, with his hair all over the place, not shaving for 20 days, slippers. You know, I designed the aviation turbine that is on the Mirage CC. Another fellow comes and says, well, I made this, whatever, ultrasound machine. And then when you get talking to them and discussing with them, it's completely different world. These are young people from our time. They're doing phenomenal work. Every month, if not, and max in 6 weeks, I go to Bangalore. We've got a lovely 50-acre campus out there, and I'd really invite you sometime over there. Whenever you have the time, please do come. I just go there to spend 2 days, just to get rejuvenated. I come out of there fresher, brighter, smarter, you know, as opposed to the outside world of, you know, doing business and so on and so forth. And it's all because of a bunch of youngsters just like yourself. It makes the world. So I'm feeling a lot better. I'm sorry if I made use of it. But thanks for your time. I really appreciated this, and delighted to look forward to meeting you again sometime. Okay? Thank you so much.
It's our pleasure to have you as a CPS. And like you said in one of your interviews, that the most simplest of the leadership mantras that I ever read, walk your talk. And we experienced that when you were explaining all the answers in the most simplest way. And you shared exactly what Anil sir taught us during a self-leadership class in most of the perspectives. And we